The Partnerships in Clinical Trials Conference is an invaluable opportunity to meet with the movers and shakers in this industry. Hi, I'm Jack Whelan from Andover, Mass. I'm a 6-year cancer survivor of a rare incurable blood cancer. I was diagnosed 6 years ago, and at that time, the general outcome for most patients after they begin treatment was about 5 years. And at that time, I decided that rather than rely on chemotherapies that were borrowed from other blood cancers, I was more interested in targeted therapy, something that would target specifically the malignancy at a very detailed level, at the molecular level. So along the way, I've gracefully transitioned from my career as a research analyst to a research advocate. And what a research advocate is, it's a type of patient advocate, but I'm more of an advocate for business, for the companies that bring us these great therapies. I think it's really important that education play a key role in the current distribution model that is bringing drugs to the patients. Really doesn't facilitate communications directly with the patient. And so I feel like I'm filling an important gap here, and that gap is a communications gap that needs to be closed, and also the technology. In healthcare, you know, our physicians, our oncologists and hematologists speak in very precise language. In fact, it's Greek to me, as most people say, because many of these words are Greek. When you say hematologic malignancy, that means something specific to a physician, but to a patient it doesn't. So part of what I'm trying to do is to be an educated, informed, what people sometimes call an ePatient, engaged, energized, empowered. There's a whole bunch of E's that are used. But I want to do it in a productive, positive way. Unfortunately, there are many patient advocates that are pretty negative about the industry and about healthcare in general. And sometimes some of them have been wronged and can't get beyond that. Unfortunately, pharmaceutical and biotech really don't do a good job in public relations either. So this is something that I think needs to be fixed, and it's part of my passion. And so I've gracefully retired as a research analyst and used my research skills to understand the technology, and it's actually part of my medicine. It's how I keep healthy, is to be informed and educated about my own disease as well. Very few primary care physicians even explore the options for clinical trials. Most of the clinical trials today are performed at major academic centers that have a loose connection to the local regional hospitals. But the local primary care physician, when he or she diagnoses a patient with cancer, for example, just doesn't have the mindset to say, let's explore what treatment options may be available in clinical trials. So that, for me, I think is a very important education milestone, that very few patients participate because they're not even asked about the option. And part of that is education, not only with the primary care physician, but also with the patients. Most patients just don't know anything about clinical trials, and much of what they know is centered on many myths and misconceptions, and we can talk about those myths and misconceptions. There's plenty of room for improvement in the whole clinical trial process. One of the basic problems, as I mentioned, is the distribution model. The biotech firm or the pharmaceutical firm really has almost no engagement with the patient, other than some educational online capabilities, brochures, DVDs, videos, things like that, which is pretty much a one-way program. The one thing that all of these firms involved, whether it's a biotech firm or a CRO or whatever, is to provide information back to the patient. I've participated in 4 clinical trials, about to start on to my 5th clinical trial, and I have never heard back once from the pharmaceutical firm whose drug I was testing. Not that I needed a thank you, but it sure would have been nice if one of them called and said, gee, how do you feel, or how was the result of the test? Now, what concerns me, maybe there's some regulatory situation that precludes them from even touching base. I mean, there are SEC obligations that don't allow them to publicly disclose what's in development. There are legal obligations that their compliance officer might say, there's the possibility for exposure here, so let's not talk to the patient. But If there were some mechanism, whether the patient was anonymized or de-identified, where a message could come back and say, thank you for your participation, and by the way, these are the results of the work that you did. I'm not participating in clinical trials for any altruistic reason. People think, wow, you're doing this for the benefit of man. And I suppose there's a little bit of that, but I'm participating in clinical trials because I want to survive. I'm a dad. I have 3 beautiful daughters. I have 3 wonderful granddaughters, not great-granddaughters. And I have a good family situation, and I want to survive. And I think the best avenue for me for survival is what's available in clinical trials. So I don't need a thank you, but I think it's good sales 101, good marketing, if somebody in the pharmaceutical industry or biotech circled back with those patients. I understand it's a difficult scenario, but somebody should make some inroads in that area now. There are many myths and misconceptions centered on clinical trials. There are those brought to us by Hollywood. You may not remember a love story, but this was this young lady that had a blood cancer, and they mentioned, gee, the only way we might be able to save Jenny is with a clinical trial. Or somebody gets sick and they say, this poor person is on their last legs, let's try a clinical trial. And these are always presented as a last resort. There's also the misconception that you're a guinea pig or a mouse rat, and you're really not. There's a very rigid, well-defined protocols and procedures that the investigators must follow. And I believe that you actually get much better care when you're participating in clinical trials because you're monitored very closely. They're looking at your biomarkers. They want success. They want you to succeed. I found myself, having participated in so many trials, that my medical team is my friends. I've invited them to my home. We've had a barbecue. We'll go out to dinner. You get to know this team pretty well after many years, and I think that is one of the benefits of clinical trials. You can feel the health care that comes from the team. So that's a myth and misconception that you're not close to your team. I could go on. There are many, but those I think are the most important. The research advocacy is a relatively new type of advocacy. We're familiar with patient advocacy, and there are many types of patient advocates. I remember sitting in the infusion chair one day, and I saw an older gentleman come in by way of taxi, and he left alone, and he really didn't understand the instructions that the nurse was giving him. And I thought, who's his advocate? Who's looking out for him? He had no family member. He had nobody there. And some healthcare institutions provide professional advocates to help someone like that. And so there's an army of very good professional advocates that patients should engage. And those are a different type of advocate than what I do. And I do get involved in some patient advocacy because it helps me keep grounded, that personal contact, that compassion that really is needed when other patients with this or similar type of blood cancer need some answers. And I'm there to help as an advisor, but not to offer medical advice. But the type of advocacy I do is really for the benefit of the businesses that bring us these great therapeutics. And that includes biotech firms and pharmaceutical companies, also CROs that really need a patient voice, not only internally in their company to give them some real-world patient perspective on the outcome, how you feel about clinical trials, your engagement with the investigators or the researchers. They don't often speak to patients, and it is something that's very engaging and that they particularly enjoy. For me, it's good medicine because it's education. The more I learn about this rare disease and the more I learn about molecular targeting agents, the more confident I am in my care. Given the opportunity, what I now know about biotech, back in high school and college, I would have chosen this field rather than information technology. I find this is fascinating, and it's a constant learning. That, to me, is an important part of research advocacy. Another part of that research advocacy is, as our government becomes more involved in healthcare, we need to educate lawmakers. And the best way to educate lawmakers is with patients. I've participated in a number of research advocate programs or rare disease. There's an rare disease legislative advocacy group in Washington that meets regularly with members of Congress and to help educate them about not only rare disease but other aspects of healthcare. Members of Congress know very little about the types of chemotherapy. I think we helped pass a bill in Massachusetts. It's the Oral Chemotherapy Parity Bill, which basically tells insurance companies you must provide the same level of coverage for a patient whether your therapy is done by infusion or in one of these new novel agents, pill form. And that is what's fair. Unfortunately, the regulations are out of date. And so one of the things that an advocate can do, a research advocate can do, is speak loudly and intelligently on behalf of the patients. The Partnerships in Clinical Trials Conference is an invaluable opportunity to meet with the movers and shakers in this industry, to meet with the key industry decision makers in an open and free format. I like the idea of networking, walking around, meeting company executives and speaking directly to them as a patient advocate and let them know that there is a strong advocacy world that wants to engage the people in life sciences. For me, it's really an incredible infusion of education that I can receive over a 3-day period. It's a lot of work. I think to be a credible patient advocate, you need to be educated. So I gobble this up. I really enjoy being here, meeting with movers and shakers, as I said, meeting with people that bring us these great therapeutics every day. I have fun reminding them about the nobility of the work that they do. That's so clear when you come to a conference like the Clinical Trial Partnerships. It's really important.